Well, Jessica so kindly introduced me. Just like to go from left to right here and take 30 seconds and introduce yourself.
Josh Brewer, formerly the principal designer at Twitter and director of user experience at SocialCast before that. I'm also co-creator of 52 Weeks of UX, and most recently now becoming a designer entrepreneur. It's exciting.
I'm Jeffrey Kalmakoff. I run design and user experience at a company called Medical. Previously, I spent some time at Simple Geo and Dig and Threadless, running design at all three of those. And I think we're supposed to talk about when we took a leap, right? Is that what we're doing?
Sure.
All right. Well, so yeah, I started a first company right out of working at an agency just out of necessity. So that was more of a I need to live. So I did that.
Hey everyone, I'm Alexi Andrzejewski. I'm the co-founder of a startup called Food Spotting, which is an app for finding and recommending specific dishes at restaurants. So if you go to a restaurant, you can find out what's good there. You can recommend dishes that you love by taking photos. Food Spotting is now part of OpenTable, where I'm a lead experience designer, working on the redesign of OpenTable. And the way that I came up with, or took the leap and got started with Food Spotting, I wasn't one of those people that set out to be an entrepreneur. I was working at Adaptive Path, which is a user experience design agency. Loved it there. I had this idea for Food Spotting on the side, but the more I talked about the idea with other people, the more I realized like this could be something that people would really use while they go out there taking pictures of their food, and eventually realized like I wanted to give it a shot. So.
Yeah, I actually want to take a quick poll of the audience. How many of you, first of all, by a show of hands, are designers? Okay, that's most of you. How many are not designers? Okay. And then of the entire audience, how many of you haven't started a company yet, you're thinking about it? A couple, okay. Yeah, to that theme, you can talk a little bit about how you guys took the leap. Josh, so recently just left Twitter.
Just left Twitter.
Big decision. So what made you want to leave and start this new thing?
Waking up in the middle of the night, constantly thinking about this thing. And I haven't talked at all publicly about it, and it's still evolving as an idea, but it was enough of a kernel, and I think you had kind of alluded to this, where you start talking about it a little bit, and you start getting people saying, oh, that needs to exist. And I heard that enough times, and I already, in my own self, believed that to be true. So it kind of just hit a tipping point where it was like, I had to do it. And that was the tipping point. Just jumped in. So.
Yeah, I actually hear that a lot with the entrepreneurs. It's not about sitting there and just trying to come up with a startup idea, Paul Graham says that the best ideas come from actually just being aware more than just trying to come up with something great. And if you can't sleep and you really got to get it done, I think that's a good indicator that you have enough passion to get started. Alexa, what about you at Adaptive Path? It's a great company, one of the most respected UX design firms in the country, probably. What made you want to leave that and risk it all and go do this thing?
Yeah, for me, the encouragement definitely came from sharing this idea that I literally was one of those ideas I woke up with one morning to do an app that focused on dishes instead of just restaurants. I immediately started just brainstorming on the side, and I thought, oh, this could be like a side project or something like that. But the more I started sharing the idea, the more I researched, I realized hey, in order to catalog all the dishes in the world, we're going to need some money, and we're going to need a team and engineers and a co-founder, and to do all that stuff, we're going to go need to raise money and eventually start a company. And it was one of those things that just kept building on itself and realizing hey, this could be a startup. This needs to be a startup for something like this to exist. And I think that I could use what I've learned at Adaptive Path to do it.
Yeah. Speaking for myself, I was at Mint actually through most of the entire late election cycle, and became kind of obsessed with the space of politics. I just found myself being very interested. I was watching 3 hours of news at night. I was starting to hack on some of my own projects and just get really into the problem space. And then originally was thinking about there's all this news coming in, and how do we take the news and turn it into action? And eventually when we get sold into it, that was the moment where, okay, I was very intimate and involved in it because it was a start of putting this thing together. Once Intuit came and sort of took us off that path, I decided, okay, I think now's the right time to start exploring this. So good timing. It was something that I couldn't ignore. Very passionate about it. Passionate about the space. Knew that the stuff I was hacking around with wasn't really a business. It took me meeting my co-founder David Benetti to sort of hone in on, okay, well, where is the opportunity here, and what kinds of things can we do? Where's the market opportunity? And that led us to create Photos. And first iteration was a lobbying product where people, everyone clearly has an issue, and our job was to take it and translate that into actually something that would affect legislation at the state or national level. So we've kicked around designer a lot. I think one of the first things we should probably do is go around and see how we actually define designer. Nobody up here thinks that it's pixel pushers and Photoshop jockeys. So how do you guys define it? Jeffrey, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, besides the obvious of solving existing problems and doing it in an elegant way, I look at it as just creating. I refer to myself as a designer, regardless of where I'm at in a company. And but outside of the realm of work, I just look at it as I like to make stuff. So I just, a lot of times I tinker. I'm constantly designing stuff. Illustrator's always open at home. I have millions of files of random things. I'm just kind of always making stuff. And sometimes it has a purpose.
Josh?
I would say for me, it's about an approach, a way of thinking. You mentioned problem solving. It's putting humans at the center of the problem and trying to define and execute a solution that can actually meet the needs of a person that hopefully is using your product. There's an interesting contrast between design and refine, and for me that's always part of it. Is there's a creation and a refinement, and that constant cycle is a big component of I think what design is to me.
Coming at it from a little bit of a different angle, I really believe that designer's greatest superpower is telling a great story, being a communicator. And that whether you're designing a button that invites you to push it, or you're designing a logo that talks about what your brand is or what your company is, or you're designing the way that you work as a startup and as a culture, it's about telling a great story and communicating to people through those things. So I believe the program that I studied at school was visual communication design. It was actually closely related to journalism at my school. And I think that actually made a lot of sense. We learned about persuasive communication and from the small things to the big things. It's about telling a story about what something is, what it can do, and what it means.
Yeah, I think that being a great designer is not this kind of magic power that only designers get. When we talk about design, it's user needs, it's business success, and how do we combine that to to create a product and solve for people, and how do we create value in the world? And I think that's a big part of also what makes a great entrepreneur. And somebody at some point decided that I want to be able to eat without using my hands, and the design solution there was a fork. So I think that we all have the ability to do it. It's just about kind of being aware of the process and being very deliberate about talking to users, figuring out what the pain points are, and then working to devise a solution. But if those are the essential skills of being a designer, why aren't there more entrepreneurs out there that are designers? Why are most of them engineers?
Dangerous question. I would say I think there's a kind of a series of things that lead to that. I think for one, for a very, very long time, design was looked at as a veneer. It was pixel pushing. It was the pretty that went on at the very end of the process. And so the tendency for people to invest in those kinds of folks was not nearly as high as someone who actually physically made the software, the engineering side of things, or even the business person who could actually put together the entire business model for the product of the company. Over time, we've seen that design is obviously much more than just the visual aesthetic. That's extremely important, but it's only one very small component of the entire design process. And the more, I think, of an awareness the general population has had, and especially if you just want to talk Silicon Valley alone, like the more aware entrepreneurs, business folks, engineers became of the overall value of design throughout the entire life cycle of building a product, the more it became taken seriously. It got written about. You can quantify with dollars the impact of design at this point, and there's enough evidence that shows that companies that adopt a very like human-centered and design-centric approach or philosophy in their company tend to be much more successful and have a little bit healthier like just internal company culture. And so I just think it's part of the evolution, and we're kind of at this inflection point where I think more designers feel like it's possible because a few people have taken the step and actually made it happen and are paving the way. So that's probably that.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add, Jared Spool, one of the guys I respect most in this industry, kind of encourage you guys to check out his stuff. He talks about sort of the stages of a marketplace. When something just does not exist, let's say there's a piece of software out there that solves a problem that previously could not be solved, barrier for that is very low. It just has to function. It could take a lot of pain, as long as it's sort of less pain than the alternative, maybe doing it by hand, maybe a spreadsheet or something that I have together. As markets mature and more competitors enter the marketplace, you kind of move up the ladder where the differentiator starts to become sort of more intangible stuff. Basically, is the user being delighted when they use it, and compared to another alternative, how does it make them feel? And it becomes very much about meeting user needs absolutely the best, as opposed to just hitting that bare minimum. Jeff, what do you think?
I think that, I think there are a lot of designer founders. We talked about this a little bit when we had the call about this panel, but there's tons of designers that are starting companies. I think what we're talking about is that there's not a lot of designers who are starting companies that are funded. And I think a lot of that has to do with all due respect to all the investors, it's because there's not a lot of designer investors. So understanding the value of design is something that is not going to be inherent in what investors are looking at. I'm not a unicorn. I can design, but I can't code. I have no desire to code, so I've never learned it. But that also means that I can't just have an idea and hack together a working prototype and go and pitch it to investor friends and have them be like, yeah, we'll throw money in that, because the thing is that pathway is really defined for engineers, and it's not defined at all for designers. But I don't think that designers are at a disadvantage. I just think that traditionally, it's particularly product design, and as it relates to tech, designers have, not really there hasn't been a lot of encouragement, I guess. But at the same time, I also don't see it necessarily as a big problem, I guess. I see it as something that it would be nice if the ecosystem was a little different and there were more designers that were getting companies funded, and because I think that designers look at things in a particular way, and that can help shape the vision of the company and particularly the culture and things like that. But I don't necessarily see it as this is really screwed up. We really need to get more designers out there, at founding companies, because it doesn't. I would say almost every single product that I use on a daily basis wasn't designed. I don't think it would be better if it had a designer founder.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting point. Engineers can build a chip, right? And Aaron Patzer and I were on a panel at South by, and it was design versus engineering, which is kind of it's kind of like a silly choice, right? But at the end of the day, it's the engineer can build and ship something. Steve Jobs built a computer with Steve Wozniak, right? These guys are building and they're shipping, and You know, some successful products like Google, Google it basically was an algorithm, right? There's not really a lot of figuring out like what the user needs. Like people know, okay, like they need to find things on the internet, you know. And the big innovation there was, you know, this search algorithm. And but a lot of engineering, the thing that I argue that, you know, with a lot of engineers is they sort of come up with these things, and you know, it's about sort of scratching this technical itch. You know, engineers are problem solvers just the same way designers are. But when engineers go to computer science school, I went to school for computer science. I did not take any classes on empathy or user research or, you know, just all the things that you learn in that path and we learn in our professional lives. You know, you just sort of learn how to solve problems through software. That said, you know, Jeffrey, why do you want to code? Like, if you want to like start something, like why not code? Or is that, you know?
I mean, I think it's boring. I'm sorry. It's just, it's just not my thing. You know, I mean, like I can write some like really hacky like CSS, like, you know, which I mean that's not even really code, but like it's more design. But that's about as far as it goes. But that's also where my interest lies. You know, I look at it. I guess I'm one of those weirdos who are of the opinion that I do think that design and engineering should be different disciplines, but I also think that design and engineering and product should be one group. So, like, I have differing opinions about that kind of stuff, but it's just never really been my wheelhouse. You know, I want to design what's best for the product and what's best for the user, and I feel like if my knowledge of code made me realize that having a line in a particular area is going to be like some giant pain in the ass for a front-end engineer, and that's going to make me change my design, then I'm glad to have that not be my problem and design it how I want it to be designed. So, you know, sorry.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I mean, I think of two examples off the top of my head. Engineers that they knew themselves, they were solving their own problems. And that's what ended up making them successful founders. Drew Houston was annoyed because he was carrying around a USB stick, lost it, and like, why is it just in the cloud? Aaron had to admit, he got annoyed with, you know, kind of tying up his stuff in spreadsheets and having to, you know, it was 6 months out of date, I had to go update this, and he's like, he knows himself, knows his pain points, went out and did it. I think for designers, we're more trained with figuring out kind of other groups of people. And, you know, the thing that I told Aaron is saying, okay, well, what if there's only one person like you in the world? And that's a problem. Alexa, what do you think about, you know, why aren't there more design entrepreneurs? And is that a good thing or bad thing?
I mean, I think I agree. I actually feel like there has been this huge rise of just, you know, great startups started by designers, and I think investors will follow because investors, you know, tend to do a little bit of pattern matching. They're like, oh, they were product design, they started Airbnb, and it's really great. And I think, you know, I think I've been really happy to see just startups like, you know, Airbnb is amazing because they didn't just design a beautiful product. They created an experience. They enabled people to have an experience they couldn't have before. Like I can travel and stay in someone's closet for $30. And you know, I think that's what, you know, what's great about being a designer is we can picture things, we can picture the future. And I mean, not just designers. I think anybody, when they set their mind to it, can do this, which is, you know, take the time to imagine this ideal experience first, and don't let the constraints get in your way at first. Even if you are an engineer, you know what the constraints are. You know, first start by throwing all that aside. Picture the ideal experience you want to create, which is like I go to this place and I can, you know, find a place to stay as easy as posting a tweet or whatever it is. Like, and you know, being able to picture that experience is really powerful. And even if that's not possible today, you know, setting that vision can help you motivate and get other people to build that thing. And I think that's what's been so amazing about startups like Airbnb and you know, TaskRabbit and others that just enable things that weren't possible before.
Can I add something to that real quick? You know, this kind of ties back into what was talked before about communication. You know, my personal opinion about code has little to do with my respect for engineering and, you know, my understanding of what builds the things that I design. Like I fully understand how that stuff works. It's just that I don't want to write it. But the thing is that I think that you know, that position of being a storyteller and needing to communicate ideas well has also like led me to have a great network of engineers that like it's almost a disservice to an idea that I would have to have me try and build it myself when I have people that I know that could do it so much better, that would be as into doing it as I would be as into designing it. So it's more, I think it's more about like looking at it in terms of like what resources are available and, you know, and figuring out how, you know, that's part of the problem solving. How do you actually get this done, you know?
Actually, I think it's a very valuable point for the audience to expound upon. You know, designers need engineers, engineers need designers. Can you expand on that? Like you said, through storytelling, you know, to like attract a network. Like, can you speak any more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that happened when I was at Threadless, because I mean, all of that stuff, you know, Threadless never had investors or anything. It was really just like the founders were like, hey, let's do this, and then they did it. And you know, I joined at some point, and it was like 6 years later, investors even really came into the picture. And the entire company was built on community and built on network. That's how we got stuff done. Almost every single person who worked in the warehouse, or almost all of the engineers that worked there, like everyone started out as part of Threadless, like outside of the company. And we really looked at you know, building these networks of, okay, we know what we want to get done, and we're completely aware that we have no idea how to do it, but there's got to be somebody out there that knows how to do it. So the way that we accomplished that was just by talking to everybody and you know, figuring out who would be the best person to do it, and then telling them the story in a convincing enough way that that becomes the most exciting thing that they could possibly work on. So, you know, I think that's sort of where that comes into play, where you need to be able to explain your ideas and get somebody else excited about it, but then also understand where somebody would fit in, even if you don't know how to do what they know how to do.
Yeah, and Lex, you brought up a good point about Airbnb. When you said design the experience, Airbnb, with all due respect to the engineering team at Airbnb, there's nothing particularly technically new that they were doing there. This is a great case for a designer who found a company and why they work. It's because they were very deliberate, very methodical while designing the experience. Paul Graham, you know, their users were in New York when they were first starting. They were living in Mountain View and Y Combinator. The users that were picking up the adoption were in New York City. And Paul's like, well, why are you in Mountain View? Go to New York. So they go to New York, and they're basically like living with their potential customers. They're wanting the experience. What are all the pain points? What's happening here? And you know, through a lot of refinement, they came up with this product that a lot more people really wanted to use. But the engineering was just, I mean, it was a marketplace. There was no page rank algorithm. There was no money categorization algorithm. It was just this marketplace and this way to connect people. And I think that's important to know for designers thinking of starting companies. Like, nail the experience, and I think that's obviously that worked pretty well for Airbnb. So Designer Fund actually is it's an organization that's trying to actually increase the number of designer founders in the world, and actually bring a lot of them from other places in the U.S., Silicon Valley. Ben Blumenfeld and Enrique Allen, they've done a lot of research. They said that the big reason there's a lack of designer founders are lack of access to capital, lack of entrepreneurial education, and then lack of successful entrepreneurial peers. Josh, do you think that's true or not true?
I would say that by and large, I think it is fairly accurate. Based on the number of conversations I've had, the number of people that occasionally DM for coffee and want to talk about, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I would like to, take a step out. I have no idea. They either have no idea how to raise money, who to talk to, how to go about that process, or they're unsure of whether or not they've got the right kind of like counterpart in an engineering co-founder or whatnot, or perhaps they are in the position of wondering whether or not, like, can I really do this, right? Like, it's a really interesting, I think, just like hurdle that the designers face is there aren't a ton of peers, and I think it was probably 6 months ago I tweeted out asking, can anybody point to a designer VC, like a venture capitalist who has been a designer in their career? And the only person that like came back was Bing Gordon over at Kleiner Perkins. There's a couple others that I've like over the last 6 months I've kind of like found and met and whatnot, but by and large, it is a missing piece in the venture world. So when you're looking for like, if you're gonna go raise money, you would wanna go talk to a designer or someone who had been a designer, right? And not having that access and not knowing where to go look for that, I think has been a big gating factor.
I mean, you covered it. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that refresh the question and I'll have a better answer.
Oh, basically, do you think that it's lack of access to capital, entrepreneurial education, lack of entrepreneurial peers that's holding designers back from starting more companies?
Yeah, I think it's all those, and probably like 100 million other things.
Yeah.
You know, like
Fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do, and I hate to use like that F word, but the failure thing comes into play because I think that you know, like designers and engineers fail differently. You know, like code can fail and end up being a good thing. You know, like when design fails, like it's pretty horrible. And it's also, you know, it's on the front end, like it's very visible, you know. So I feel like designers get used to this idea of becoming afraid of failure because it's very, it's public. It's like, you know, if somebody does a shitty redesign of a website, like, but the code also sucks, like nobody is like, well, yeah, I mean, like that database was pretty jank, you know, like nobody cares because they're going to talk about the design. So, you know, I do think fear is a big thing. I mean, I see that in a lot of designers, like the same thing with you, like if I get people who ask me to get coffee or whatever and talk about like wanting to leave a company or do something, and I always ask like, what's stopping you? They never have a good answer. They may have an answer, it's just not good. Like it's not it's their brain lying to them. They're artificial barriers, you know. There's nothing like any one of you guys could email a VC and get a meeting. It's not hard. You send an email, you make a schedule, and you go. You know, I mean, you may blow it, but like that's it. Like, it happens, you know. And I think that like, and that's okay. Like you have to. I mean, like I've never gotten funding for a company of my own, but I've helped other people raise money. As like the company I'm at now, like I helped raise the first round, and you know, like we had good meetings and we had bad meetings, and it happens. But I feel like designers, I feel are a little bit more sensitive to failure, so you become a little bit more like risk averse, I guess.
Yeah, so afraid of failure, maybe a little emotionally attached to designs, you know? Designers are around the tables for that. Why else do you think they don't start companies also?
I think, you know, investors are looking for the same things, whether you're a designer, an engineer, or a business person. They're looking for a great vision. They're looking for, you know, some proof points, some validation that people actually want the thing you're building besides you, and things like that. And I think actually designers are in a great position to communicate all those things to an investor. So that, I mean, in my mind, it's just, like there's no reason a designer can't go and pitch their company. And then, you know, maybe I don't know anything about success rate for designers versus not designers, but I feel like that's much less of a factor, or much less of a factor in raising money for Queen's Body than those same things, you know, tell a great story, traction, things like that. And I think designers are in a good position to tell that great story, especially. And so, you know, I think it's less of that. But I do think one of the challenges not on that list is access to engineers. Because when I was in the design agency world, Dr. Path, like I felt like I never met engineers. Like I went to interaction design events, IXD conference, UX conference. You know, like when I wanted to start Fuse I realized I didn't know a single engineer. And so like every time I met an engineer, I told them about Fuse and saw if they want to start it. I met like, you know, PHP, Apache server engineers, and I had no idea the difference between them and someone who actually built the thing that I wanted. And that was really pathetic. And so I think like education about engineering, like understanding what to even look for in an engineer. Like I feel really sad when I meet a great you know, founder, whether they're a designer or just a founder who's not an engineer, who just doesn't understand engineering, brings the wrong person on. It happens so many times, and like, you know, they're not able to build the thing because, you know, it turns out they're not an iOS developer, they're a web developer, or whatever, like, you what the General Assembly is doing with the classes about like, there's classes that are like UX for engineers, or I've seen like a lot of things about like design for engineers, but I need like engineering for designers, which is not like learning to code the thing yourself, but having enough of an understanding of code and what to look for in an engineer and things like that, and having an engineer friend help. That's eventually how I found my co-founder. I met this guy and I said like, can you help me interview developers so I know what I'm looking for? And then he started meeting up with me and telling me what I should look for a developer co-founder, and I was like, wow, you'd be a great developer co-founder.
And engineer friends, I think, are, I mean, it sounds so weird and calculated, but
Because it is.
because it is. But and I would say I was lucky to have made some good friends that were engineers that happened to be engineers, and I wasn't like, hey, you're an engineer, let's go get coffee. But I do think it's important because I completely agree with you. You know, like I've helped other people recruit. I've done a lot of recruiting myself, and it's difficult when you're trying to vet people that you don't really know. Forget you don't even know how to do what they do. Like you don't know how to tell good from bad. So being able to have somebody that's there I think is really important. So like having people that you trust that have your best interest in mind and aren't just trying to become that person and just talking shit about everyone else and making them look real good. I think it's really important. So, and I have advice for that, by the way, real quick. The one thing I've learned since being at Bedible, because we've done a bunch of hackathons, and up until actually Monday, I was the only designer at Bedible. So we would have these hackathons with all these engineers, and I would be the only designer there, and I was so busy. And it's because there were no other designers there, and hackathons are really lame if there's no design. Like, I mean, it's cool to look at stuff, but it's also like, you know, awkward, clunky, like, you know, there's no design at all. So go to hackathons, sign up for a hackathon, get in touch with them and let them know that you want to go there and you want to help out the groups with design so you can float, and just go and meet 20 or 30 engineers, see who you click with. You'll probably you'll meet people that way, and like it's a really good way to spend time with engineers and also be like the most important person in the room, which satisfies the designer ego. So it's
That's a great point. So learning how to speak the language, hackathons, Josh, like along the same line, what are some other myths we can debunk or advice you can give potential designer founders out in the audience? Like, what's your advice to how to, you know, like encourage them to get overwhelmed and solve any problems?
Definitely. One of the big things that I've talked to a lot of designers about, whether they're younger or older in their career, it doesn't matter. Especially if they don't have much startup experience, is to immerse yourself in understanding what in the heck this thing is. What is equity? What's a cap table? You know, what are board members? Why do you have board members? You know, what is venture capital? And what are series, you know, seed through series, you know, whatever. That whole entire universe to designers is normally like, you know, and I mean, I hate to say it, like I've seen extremely talented designers get totally screwed out of really what they deserve in equity in a company, because they just had absolutely no way to talk about it, no frame of reference, didn't know how to ask, what percent of the company is that number you just gave me? You know what I mean? Like, these are really like basic foundational things, but I don't know if it's because generally designers I don't know if they just don't gravitate to that type of stuff or not, or what it is, but it's been something I've encouraged almost every single person that I've met to spend time, do a little bit of research and understand just the terminology, and even better, I mean, I've actually talked with Ben and Enrique at Designer Fund about getting like classes going on like, what is the business side? The, you know, and kind of the money and the venture and all that piece. And if you can come into, you know, pitching VCs, but you actually know what you're talking about, completely different story.
And I think to that point, like for us, one of the most important people to get food spotting off the ground is our lawyer. And we found that and you would think a lawyer, but like our lawyer, Josh Cook from Gunderson, like he's like so super connected to the startup scene and just understands all that stuff and like literally coached us through all of that from the beginning. And obviously the lawyers end up costing you big bucks down the road, but they also, you know, yeah, they save you big bucks. And I would say, don't skimp on a lawyer. Don't just go to legalzoom.com or whatever and get your legal document set up. Like really, find someone who's willing to coach you through those initial stages. Like if the law firm believes in your idea, they'll often defer the cost till you raise money and things like that. And just whether it's that person or whether it's an angel investor, an early person, find a coach who can help you understand that stuff. Like I got the Entrepreneur's Guide to Business Law, and I read it, but that lawyers and coaches and early investors were just invaluable in getting us off the ground and not getting us screwed.
Yeah, demystifying business, demystifying engineering. Yeah, great points of advice, and also good if you're just going to join a company. Designers, the career path for typical designers, they go to agencies, right? Does that tend to be good, bad? Does that prepare them for being an entrepreneur? What do you guys think about that?
What do you guys have?
Well, so I guess I have sort of a particular view on it. I think agency work is really important. I guess if startups are war, then agencies are basic training. I think that, so my career started out as, well, technically I started out designing radio flowers, but, hey, it's the truth. But, so I spent about 2 years at an agency, and I learned a ton, I really did. I mostly learned what I didn't want out of my job. And I learned how I would never want to run a company, and I learned, why I thought that it felt weird to be commoditized and all these things that were negative about it. But when I left, I realized that I learned all this good stuff. But the thing is that you learn about deadlines, which are really important. You learn how to kiss 99% of your work goodbye. It's really important. I can't tell you how many designers I know or have worked on a team with me who just can't let go. It's like they birthed it and they're like, "This, are you serious? You're going to take this from me?" And it's I think it's one of the most undervalued skills, which is the ability to just fucking delete a file. To be out. And it could be, and of course, it's always going to be the one that you like the most.
Right.
So you also learn how to deal with sort of navigating bureaucracy, and which I've found to be really important when it comes to when companies start to scale, because agencies, if you work at a big agency, there's a lot of experiences that you get there that you won't get at startups. Like if your startup gets real big, and then that's the first big company you've ever worked at, and you don't know how to work at a big company because you've never worked at one. So then your company starts to outpace you and outgrow you and outscale you, and then you become less and less useful to your own company. I think that some of the agency creative directors that I worked with were, they're, you can be all right, agency creative directors, paper pushing and blah, blah, that kind of stuff, but they know the game. I mean, there's a lot of game to it. There's a lot of business to being a creative director or executive global head of creative or whatever. I mean, they're kind of bullshitty jobs, but from a title point of view, but the thing is that those people have serious skills when it comes to business, and there's a lot to learn from them. So I do think spending time at agency is really important. When I hire, if I find somebody, the unicorns for me are solid, product designers who have spent a couple of years at startups and spent a couple of years at agencies. I don't care if you know how to code.
One of the things that we've talked about in the past is the difference between being an entrepreneur and entrepreneur. So maybe not everyone's ready to go out there and just start something, and maybe that's not the best thing for everyone. You don't have to just go and start a company. So what does being entrepreneurial in an organization mean? Josh?
That's a fantastic question. I actually think it ties a lot back to one of the skills that you identified, which is storytelling. And especially in a larger organization, one of the greatest ways you can be entrepreneurial is to tell the story, to help people see the thing that they couldn't see without you. And I think designers have a very unique gift of being able to merge both the storytelling and the visualization of that story. And when those two things come together, you often become the person who births an idea. You are able to bring it into existence, and that is extremely entrepreneurial, especially in a corporate setting.
And I think something that's really important as a designer, whether you're starting a startup or in another company, is not just designing products and creating ideas, but designing the way in which you work with other people and the way your teams work. I'm currently now at Open Table, which is a bit bigger than Food Spotting, but there, we're building a design team and teaching the whole company what does design mean, and it's not just like, can you give me a question mark icon, please? That it can be so much more. And so we've come up with principles like we're going to make work visible. We're going to put everything we do up on the walls, and we're going to expose the guts of the process and make a big mess out of everything. But that's to educate the organization about what design is, and it's still telling a story. It's telling a story about design as well as about the products we're trying to create. And I think that it's really important to be an influence and shape the things around you, not just the products, but your own experience and the culture. And a startup is critically important as well.
All right, last question before we go to Q&A. I'm actually curious what you guys think. What designer trait is inherently dangerous if they want to go and start a company? I think for me, I know that I really like to create stuff. I come up with ideas, and sometimes finishing those is a struggle. I just like to do this. Focusing on something, driving all the way to completion. That's what is needed to launch, ship, iterate, and deliver your company. What would you guys want to tell the audience?
I think, I think it's ego, and there's pluses and minuses to it. But I mean, when it comes to designers in founding positions, I'm always of the opinion that designers make the best number 2 people, because coming up with an idea is one thing, but like constantly iterating and and constantly refining and all these things. I feel like you said before, that is something that is very design focused. The problem is, designers have egos. That's part of being a designer. At some point you look around the world and you're like, this kind of sucks. I think I could do this all better. And you go after it, and there's ego there. And I think that, over time that ego gets replaced with experience. And then, you reach this sort of equilibrium where you have enough ego to keep it going, but enough experience to know when to shut the hell up. So, I think that being, having ego is potentially dangerous, because it's going to be difficult, I think, to have an idea and then let everyone else run with it. Because I know if I did that, I would want to do certain things myself, and my vision would be so clear that I think it would be frustrating to even though I'm aware that the process is iterative, to see it not at the final vision, because that's where my brain will always be at. So it's like your friend and your enemy at the same time.
Josh, Alexa, warning for designers out there.
I think that there's definitely a tendency in a designer to have conviction around a solution, which again, the interesting thing, a lot of the things that make a great designer are being able to temper these, or be able to control these things. So the ego, like you just described, you have to have conviction that your solution is the right thing. Otherwise, you're just flailing around and you're wasting everyone's time. But you also can become blind to whether or not there's an Achilles heel in the solution you're offering. And I've seen time and time again, just the unwillingness to let go of something can actually stunt the progress of a product and also the designer behind it as well.
Great. I think we'll go on to questions. The important thing is to be vision-driven, not necessarily solution-driven.
Great. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic. Right here. And if you guys can just say who you're directing it to, so we can get as many questions in as possible.
This is to everybody, actually. As a designer, I noticed that I recognize opportunities based on the potential to improve the user experience and not based on the potential to make money. Is this a problem for designers when they're trying to make startups?
I think Food Spotting would be somewhat of a good example of that. money in the long run, but like, you know, I think, I kept saying, like, I feel like food spotting is something that, you know, delivers value to the consumer, to the user, of being able to share share great dishes, find great dishes, etc. It's not something people would necessarily pay for, just like people wouldn't necessarily pay for Twitter. Twitter creates a lot of value for consumers, and then the business model kind of has to come on top of that and find some way to make money off of that value. And I guess like, you know, some people in the investor or entrepreneur community would just say like, you know, if it's not, if you can't make money off it, it's not valuable or something like that. Like, you know, value is what someone's willing to pay for it. So if people aren't even willing to pay for it, how it's valuable. But I think that's not true. I think there's a lot of things that for whatever reason people expect it to be free, but they're valuable. And, you know, the creativity comes in finding a way to then make money off of that thing. That doesn't kill the experience, and you know, I do think that yeah, there can be reconciliation between those things.
Yeah, I'd say you really got to know kind of what journey do you want to embark on. Twitter is just not a good example of something that you could just go out and do. They got very lucky. It was sort of an accident. And if you want to go out and try and like do that, it's just tough. There's a reason why if you look at lean startup methodology, actually asking someone, are you willing to pay for it? You know, that tells you how much of a user pain it really is. And if it is a user pain, they're willing to pay something somehow. That's a great place to start with kind of making any business. Out here in the Valley, we've sort of gotten sidetracked with all this like consumer, just, you know, hey, you know, we'll get massive adoption. Which is great. Sometimes it is tough to plan for stuff like that. So I think you just got to know, like, hey, am I going to go this path, trying to just shoot for massive consumer traction and raise money off of it, or do I want to take a more, you know, traditional path of, you know, that, you know, human civilization has been kind of doing for, you know, ever since there's money of, you know, I have something you wanted, like, let's barter, let's, like, you know, you can pay me for it. So. Yeah, I think it's just a good test to figure it out and you kind of get ready for the ride one way or the other.
I just want to add something real quick. I think, I think the brutal truth of startups is that if you don't care about money, you should not be in startups. And I'm not talking about exit money. I'm just talking about understanding how businesses work and being supported by investors throughout the entire lifespan of your company. And I'm not talking about companies that are awesome and get acquired early, like in their life cycle. 4 years is early. You know, I'm talking about like understanding that, you know, like the investor teat needs to go away at some point. And if you can actually like raise your company without it, that's kind of a positive, because once you start to understand how money works and how equity works and how that affects your business and your particularly your control of the business and all those sort of things, I think that if you don't care about those things, it's actually detrimental to the team that you're on, because ultimately, you know, everything kind of flows up towards the top. So it's, you know, like design is satisfying what product needs, and product is satisfying the business needs, and ultimately it's all about revenue, because if you don't have revenue, then companies have to stay afloat with some money. You know, like Twitter isn't just like out there, like somebody's like, hey, gratis, anything, we'll just give you server space. Like Twitter's great, like somebody's paying for Twitter. It's, you know, they need, you know, and you need to, like everyone needs to understand that in startups, because the ultimate goal is independence. And if you're just like stuck underneath your investors the whole time because you're not worrying about revenue and things like that, then I think it's a huge problem.
Yeah, you do have a panel on it. Be careful about raising money. It's basically a countdown to death. You know, if you don't have this figured out or something figured out, it's just a countdown to death. You know, you start spending and start making different decisions, and when you run out, you're done. You can't, you know, you sort of can't undo that if you raise the wrong amount.
Yep, next question, great. All right, I have one here, where's the next one, just so I'll be ready. All right, thank you.
So design is one of those things that can absolutely thrive if the culture around it is cultivated, but that's not always the case around either a large organization or even a small one. So what sort of tactics or strategies do you guys have for cultivating that culture as an individual in the trenches?
Josh worked at.
Brainwashing. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually not so, well, I can't even go into that. Not related to it, sorry, that was a little tangent. My answer to that would be the most effective you can be, whether it is a small or large organization, is by constantly spending at least some portion of your time building relationships and building trust with other areas of the company, whether it's business or finance or HR or engineering or whatnot. But it's taking the time to not only explain but show and include other people in the way you work, the way you think, how you're approaching things. Similarly, listening turns out to be a really, really, really important skill as a designer in general, whether it's listening to users or listening to teammates and trying to process what they're saying and then reframing it back to them in a way that I from my standpoint would be a more like design-centric way to approach a problem. And I know there's a number of folks at Twitter in my time there that we had amazing breakthroughs and progress the second that we all could actually just drop our agendas and like listen to one another. And then from that place, you can start encouraging them, and you can throw sticky notes and sketch pads and markers in front of them and encourage them to draw. People who swear to God they can't draw to save their life, the second you break that barrier, suddenly there's a trust and there's a respect that happens. And at the same time, you've built in the beginning of a skill that then starts to translate through the rest of the organization. So you can see it's definitely it's a process, and it's one that I think if it evolves organically and happens through relationship, it has the potential to really transform your organization.
Yeah, I'd say when other people come up with the idea, it tends to be better than you come up with the idea. But at its core, design is this rational process. It should help every other team succeed. If you listen to them, you identify their needs and say, hey, here's how we're going to intentionally design a solution as opposed to you unintentionally designing a solution. And if they don't listen, then I think that means they are irrational and you should find another place to work.
Well, I have some actionable advice. So, really? No, that wasn't a comment about. Dude, how long have we known each other? Okay, that was really not anything bad. I swear, I'm a nice person. Okay, so actionable advice. I think it's just letting people know that it's okay to have their voice be heard. The one thing, I gave a talk recently about being the first designer at an organization, because that's generally where I tend to end up. So as the first designer, it's kind of like your job to instill, no one else is going to create a design culture, so it's your job to do it. Unless you're working with other designers, like at Threadless, I was lucky, and everyone there was a designer in the beginning. So the culture was awesome, and it was very open, but especially like when I was at Dig, when I was at Simple Geo, and especially now at Bettable, like letting people know that their opinion is valuable, because the thing is that everyone's a user, so everyone is closer to what you do for your job than what engineers do, right? So they're going to have opinions about it, and everyone's opinion is completely valid, and I think the first part is recognizing that everyone's opinion is completely valid. And then following through on that is, it's not that people don't have good design ideas, it's that non-designers have no idea how to give feedback. So I think that one of the best things that you can do is just let people know like how to best give you feedback that will work best with your process. And once you start involving people and you start getting the people at your company, whether it's an office manager or an engineer or whoever, who understand how to give you feedback, then you're going to find that you're going to end up with a ton of feedback, and a lot of it will be really good. So, and that's really just how it starts. It is not making people's fear of design realized in shutting yourself off in headphones and just not talking to anyone all day. You really have to hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Print something out and give it to somebody and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And if you have an idea, draw it on there. For real,
It really, really works.
That's actually, thank you for saying that, because that's probably the single most effective thing I've seen repeatedly, is if you print stuff out and put it on the walls, it will change the culture of your company. I guarantee it. You may not like it for a while because everyone and their mom will stop by and talk about it and tell you what it should be instead of what, you know. But the amazing thing is, as soon as that thing's on the wall, and as soon as it's not you, it's this thing that we're talking about, and you break down that barrier of like, please draw on it, please, you know, like, you invite that level of feedback, the entire conversation changes and people's disposition change, and the way that they approach you and what you do begins to change. It's
our product versus your design.
It's really powerful.
On that note, I wanted to give some actual advice too.
Oh.
One of the important things that we've developed at both Food Spotting and Adaptive Path and Open Table is a set of design principles that we come up with the whole organization, or as many people as we can involve in the process, which give people, with the goal of giving people a framework to talk about design. Because one of the things I realized is like people would just be like, when the stuff's on the walls, like, I like this, or I really like that, or I love purple, or whatever. And instead, we actually put a big like universal no sign over the words I like. Instead, we came up with a set of principles like, you know, don't, you know, like with food spotting, like food spotting is positive, or, you know, it's, or like, you know, never trap me, always give me a way out. And then people can, and so instead you have to say, I really believe this supports this design principle because blah. And I think it's really important to come up with principles for your company that are used for your company, and that aren't just usability principles, but things that will help people talk about and make decisions about design. And that's a really great tactic that you can use to just get everyone on board and talking about design the same way.
I also like winning arguments with data.
Great. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So it's going to take one from the Twitterverse. So this will count as half, so if maybe one person can answer it. What resources are there to learn the venture capital lingo? And this is from @Fredland.
I mean, I think there's a really great book on Amazon, like
Venture Hacks, is that
yeah,
what it is?
yeah, I think so.
That's the one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Learn everything.
Founders
about that
Dilemma.
too.
Founder's Dilemma.
Venture deals is another one.
What is it called?
Venture deals.
Deals.
Venture deals. Yeah.
I love that we've crowdsourced the answer, right? All right, so
Venture Hacks is available.
because of that, you get to ask the next question.
So this is for everyone. What are your positive and negative experiences while working with agile teams?
Agile teams?
I was going to say, when you were asking the question about what are some of the biggest strengths of a designer that can be hard in an entrepreneurial context, I would say perfectionism. That, you know, designers feel like, you know, we found the right solution, or the one that, you know, communicates the best, or it is the best, or whatever, and we really want to build that. But I've certainly learned both in the agency world and in the startup that the perfect is the enemy of the good. Because, and visual designers, you know, struggle with this too. It's just like wanting to get that thing, you know, redesign the whole app before we ship it, a year and a half later or whatever. Instead of, you know, launching part, realizing, you know, hey, not everything's going to match right now, but maybe it's better to get something out there to see if people even want it. And I think that can be really hard to adapt to.
I would counter that in one capacity, which is that the second you introduce something that's another language, and then you insert it into a previous language, you aren't taking into account the whole experience, and suddenly people are confronted with potentially conflicting paradigms and conflicting metaphors in the UI, and it's constantly the thing I struggle with the most. I do believe that like the danger is a 1.5-year design process. Like that's the worst possible thing that you could do. The best thing that you could do is a very early, like long-range arc of where do we want to end. It may not be like fine-tuned detail, but it's essentially a map of where you want to end up, and you begin to take smaller chunks into that.
Right, I think it's really important to have a picture of what that minimum desirable product looks like. That's not just the thing that's viable, but the thing that all the pieces do work together, even though they're not all 100% perfect. And to be able to build around that, so that like adaptive path uses the metaphor of making a cake. Like you don't go from the process of a plain cake, and then later you add filling, later you add icing. Instead, you give people a cupcake at first. It's like a little bit of everything that's a complete big wedding cake until the end. And then I think that even in the agile process, like coming up with sprints that get you to a desirable product each time is a good way to think of that too.
Yeah, I think an important thing to stay sane and actually get your work done. Just know what deliverable is required for the task.
Right.
Not everything. You have to basically convince engineers that no, we do not need a high fidelity mock-up for all 42 states of how this product should operate. The high fidelity mock-up is really for you to make sure that things are feeling exactly pixel perfect, and then I would use a different deliverable for communicating all different states. You also have to be okay with shipping something that is not pixel perfect, as I do every day. That's why it's the internet. You can change it. It's not like
Mobile.
it's not like making a car or a physical good. We're fortunate in that we can always go back and refine. And the other with agile teams,
Fragile team.
fragile teams.
All right, we have one question here.
I have a question directed at Jeffrey. What particular thing or approach do you take to find unfulfilled niches in the market, or find particular needs of the general public that aren't fulfilled? A particular way that you discover those or something like that. I have a .org that I'm trying to turn into a nonprofit, and I don't want just another nonprofit on the market replicating what many others are already doing, and I want to specialize in something in particular. So I'm wondering, what approach do you take to find those unfulfilled niches?
The short answer is that I really haven't. But just because like in the traditional sense, like I haven't gone out and founded a company, like I haven't had that like aha and then wanting to do that. I've had a lot of aha moments, but then I've always ruled them out against other opportunities, I guess. But I think, I mean, just generally, I think, if you always want to be building something opinionated, right? Because otherwise it's just going to get pushed around and it's going to end up like all of the other companies or organizations that, you don't like. So I think, one of the best things that you can do is just make a list of all the things that you don't want to be, and all the things that you don't like about the other. I mean, it seems really negative, but it actually exposes all the positives. So like, if you basically build a roadmap of everything that you don't want to do, then you'll start to, things will surface like in a recurring way of, oh, but I do want to do this. And then I think you just start like paying attention to that thread and just building upon it. Validation is huge. I mean, like just standard kind of like product process, make sure that like what you feel is the best solution, other people feel is the best solution. And for me, like that's a lot of time, that's the main reason why I haven't like gone ahead and started companies before, because like I'll have an opinion on something and I'll realize that I'm wrong. And like, I could be like, all right, screw it, the world's wrong, I'm right, and then like go out and try and raise money. Or you can just pay attention to what people actually say, and go out and just like interview the hell out of everybody and talk to everyone and, share your idea with everyone and see what they think, and, see what they think about what you think is bad and see if they think it's bad too, see if everyone's on the same page, and just use that information to start to shape how you can differentiate yourself.
All right, I think we're out of time, or is that one more? Is that 1 minute? Out of time.
If you guys want to say final.
Closing thoughts?
To summarize, designers are great at telling a great story and also need to be great at being great listeners. I think those are both, talk and listen, communicate and listen is some of the most important traits for designers and entrepreneurs to experience.
I think, don't be in a rush to start a company, because, I think the velocity that you get into it is likely going to be the velocity at which you'll like fly out of it. Every day that you're not the founder of a company, you're learning things about what you would do if you were. Don't feel pressured to start a company, and if you realistically know that you don't have the experience to run or start that company,
then make your decisions about where you work and what you do as a plan of attack of how to get there if that's what you ultimately want to do.
To wrap up, I would say great companies are usually built around great products, and as a designer, we usually are really close to the products. And so, again, don't rush into, like, don't start a company to start a company, but if you've got an amazing product that needs a company to support it and to grow it and to be there, then to me, by all means, take the leap. It's a great risk, yes, but the reward is amazing.
Yeah, don't start just to start it, but most people I talk to that went to business school say that everything you learn there is actually the opposite of what you should be doing. So I think the best way to, most people say the best way to sort of get started is to just get started. You're going to learn the job, and you're going to learn a lot, and don't be afraid to fail. Thanks a lot for coming.